State media are reporting that a championship wrestler has been executed. Navid Afkari was sentenced to death in 2018. Afkari's case drew widespread condemnation from the international community.
Iran executed a popular wrestling star today despite an international campaign to save him.
Iran's execution of a wrestler accused of murder has sparked an international outcry after appeals for him to be spared were ignored.
Execution of famous wrestler Navid Afkari has sparked international outcry.
Trotz Proteste aus dem Ausland hat der Iran den Ringer Navid Afkari hingerichtet. Der 27-Jährige starb in einem Gefängnis in der südiranischen Stadt Shiraz.
La ejecución del luchador iraní Navid Afkari, que fue acusado de asesinar a otro hombre tras participar en las protestas contra la situación económica y la represión política en Irán en 2018.
You guys just broke my heart to say that man lost his life. I thought we were going to be able to save him. He just lost his life? Like, that just messed me up. Somebody just lost their life for protesting. That just messed me up.
Yeah, no.
That is so sad, bro. That is so sad. I thought we were going to save that kid.
Yeah, no, it really is terrible. But
broke
listen,
my heart, bro.
Back to the action here tonight. I mean, did anything
There's
surprise
nothing else to
you?
talk about, man. That guy lost his life. I'm just here. Somebody just lost their life, bro. I don't even want to talk right now. That's so sad. It's messed up, man. Y'all pulled that right before my fight, and that just really blew my mind. I can't even talk right now.
Navid Afkari, born in 1993, was killed by Iran's authorities on September the 12th, 2020. He was an Iranian wrestler who was sentenced to death for taking part in the 2018 protests. His brothers Vahid and Habib were sentenced to 54 and 27 years imprisonment respectively, plus 74 lashes. When the news of the verdicts were publicized on the 1st of September, a massive international campaign started, aiming to stop the execution of the national wrestler. Navid was among the people who took to the streets during the 2018 protests in Iran, opposing the totalitarian dictatorship of Khamenei and the ever-worsening living conditions nationwide. He was charged with multiple offences after his sudden arrest shortly after the protests. Among his charges were insulting the supreme leader, waging war against God, also known as Mohareb, and the alleged case of Hassan Talkman's murder. Talkman was a secret security agent of the IRGC, which were tasked with silencing the protests, and after his death he was buried as a martyr by the regime, signifying his position. The murder charge was strongly refuted by Navid. There was no evidence linking him to that case. For his involvement in the protests, and further the alleged murder case, the court sentenced Navid Afkari with 2 capital punishments. Navid voiced his concern regarding the despicable ruling. In one of his voice calls from the Adel Abad prison, he said,
مخاطب من هر آدمی که دم از انسانیت میزنه و ذره‌ای از شرافت توی وجودش هست. سکوت شما یعنی حمایت از ظلم و ظالم، یعنی حمایت از اعدام شدن یه بیگناه. یعنی گام به گام نزدیکتر شدن من به چوبه اعدام.
He insisted his innocence, stating,
مردم، من به حکم عقل و انسانیت موظف به حفاظت از جان خودم هستم.
People, it is only logical that I will fight for my life, and as per the evidence, all clues are an affirmation to my innocence. All the evidence that we have collected, and everything that I am saying right now, is only here to let you know that if I ever get executed in the 21st century, and with all the human rights organizations, the UN or Security Council or whatever else, an innocent human being who had tried to the best of his might and fought to have his voice heard, was hanged. He warned people about the systematic corruption infesting the judicial system of Iran and how innocent lives get taken by their unjust rulings, stating, know and be aware that if the innocent me gets executed, this won't be the first victim of the unfairness of this so-called justice-orientated, unjust court. Afkari's death sentence sparked global outrage and calls to overturn his execution. Notable figures, including the US President Donald Trump, International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach, and UFC President Dana White, pled for Iran not to execute Afkari.
Hey everybody, I'm UFC President Dana White, and this week the New York Times wrote a story about a very famous wrestler from Iran. His name is Navid Afkari, and he went to a peaceful protest in Iran, and he's going to be executed for that. So it was brought to my attention, and this guy is, first of all, he's a human being, number one. Number two, he's one of us, could be any of my fighters. And the only thing I thought to do was to call the president and see if he could help this man. And he said, let us look into it. Let me talk to my administration and see if there's something we can do to save his life. So today, the president tweeted the tweet that's attached to this video. And I would just like to say that I too, respectfully and humbly, ask the government officials in Iran to please not execute this man and spare his life.
On September the 12th, it was announced that Navid had been executed. No one exactly knows how this was done. His burial was done at night time with high security presence, and only Navid's immediate family members were allowed to take part. His execution was rushed, and that raised a lot of speculation as to why that might have been, especially with massive global outcry suggesting to put an end to the execution. This execution is not the first execution of an Iranian athlete. Early in the 1980s, the regime executed Habib Kabiri, the captain of Iran's national football team. Hushang Montasserol Zohor, a wrestling national champion, and Forosan Abdi from Iran's national volleyball team, amongst others. Navid Afkari was announced executed in the early morning hours of September the 12th, 2020, in Adel-Abad prison in Shiraz. The news generated an outcry. The regime's FM had to cancel an arranged visit to Berlin with his European counterparts from the E3 countries, and those who campaigned for stopping Navid's execution continued to campaign for serious action against the regime, including sanctions and a total ban from international sports competitions.
Well, for more on this story, we spoke with Brendan Schwab. He's the executive director of the World Players Association, and he explained why Navid Afkari's execution appears to be a warning to others who might question the Iranian regime.
Well, it's incredible to think that in a year in which athlete activism has inspired so many people throughout the world to address systemic injustice, we've had a situation in Iran where an athlete has been targeted because of his profile. He was found on the proximity of some anti-regime protests 2 years ago and was arrested. We're working very closely with human rights groups on the ground in Iran and those close to Navid's legal team and others who have been supporting him. The sad reality is that this is an execution that's gone ahead. The only evidence that the state has is a confession which was obtained through torture. So there's no suggestion whatsoever that there's no evidence that points him to the crime. We do believe it's a case where Iran has targeted a high-profile athlete, and as you would expect from the perspective of trying to drive human rights in sport and make sure that sport is true to its humanitarian values and the rights of athletes are upheld, this is a case of devastating concern. And this is an execution that takes place in silence. We were concerned that when he was put into that place on the weekend that we needed to elevate the campaign. There was an extraordinary response led by Sally Roberts and the wrestling community, but all of athlete really across sport to do the best to make it clear that any act by Iran in proceeding with this execution would amount to a repudiation of Iran's right to be a part of the international sporting community. It's a brazen act by the state to proceed with the execution, given the international scrutiny that the country has been placed under by this extraordinary campaign. We do think that the International Olympic Committee and the other sports bodies need to make it clear that this act does result in suspension. We do also call on the International Olympic Committee to make it clear that it condemns the use of the death penalty generally, and particularly the use of torture, and also to make a stand for athlete activism. Sport can be a force for good, but it has to back up good words with powerful and strong deeds.
That was Brandon Schwab. He is the executive director of the World Players Association.
Inside Iran, the news of the execution resulted in an outcry, public protests, and a vow by activists not to remain silent until they bring perpetrators to justice.
ما همه نوید هستیم.
A group of 5 independent UN human rights experts pointed out in a report on Monday, September the 14th, that Mr. Afkari's secret execution was the second in connection to demonstrations over the last 2 months, which, together with the alarming frequency of death penalty sentences handed to protesters, raises concerns about the authorities' future response to protests and to any expression of opposition or dissenting opinion. As a warning to its population in a climate of increasing social unrest, the UN experts said, while sending their condolences to Mr. Afkari's family.
در شرف 25 سالگی بودم و با یه جیب خالی راهی جز کنار گذاشتن کشتی و کمک به معیشت خانواده به ذهنم نرسید. تو خانواده‌ای که من رشد کرده بودم از بچگی یاد گرفتم عزت شرافت عزیز مثل مادرم به تمام آرزوها و امیال شخصی اولویت داره و همیشه یادمون دادن به خاطر عزیزامون از خودمون بگذریم. رفتم سر کار و بعد از 6-7 ماه کارگری شهریور سال 97 دستگیر شدم و الانم که زیر تیغ اعدام. دلم میخواد همه دنیا بدونن که من از بچگی آرزو داشتم با افتخارات جهانی تو کشتی مادرم رو خوشحال کنم، اما چی کنم که نشد و زور چرخ روزگار و عرقایی که من تو کشتی ریختم چربی و اشک مادرم هم در آورد. اما امروز خوشحالم چون همون چرخ روزگار بازم چرخید و حالا آرمان‌های حقیقی انسانیت رو از شما مردم بی‌نظیر یاد گرفتم. آرمان‌هایی که برام به مراتب ارزشمندتر و والاتر از سکوهای جهانی و کشتیه. توی سالا که کشتی گرفتم هیچ وقت با حریف ناجوان مردی روبرو نشده بودم. کشتی ذاتاً ورزش جوان مردانه است. اما 2 ساله که من و خانواده‌ام داریم با ناجوان مردترین حریف تاریخ بشریت یعنی بی‌عدالتی دست و پنجه نرم می‌کنیم و بدون شک اگه حمایت و کمک شما رو نداشته باشیم هممون شکست می‌کنیم.